it is meant to be fun, interactive today, and really hope you enjoyed the day. Fantastic community here at Inspired, and feel free to, we'll ask a few questions this morning. We've already been chatting about this as a group, so lots of energy about it. But if there is something that you'd really like to ask, then do put your hand up and we will obviously try and include you. And it's fantastic again to see so many familiar faces, so thank you very much. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my fantastic panel, or I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So we've got Sol from HSBC. Sol, maybe a couple of words on you.
Yeah, hi everybody. Happy Tuesday. I had to remember that. I wasn't drinking loads last night, honestly. I'm at HSBC. I work in group in operations, basically, as the innovation lead for them. Very much focused on bringing the outside in terms of new ideas, concepts, and also partnerships as we try and build an ecosystem that is going to make us a future fit enterprise. And that spans beyond technology, so thinking about ways of working, culture changes as well. Looking forward to speaking today. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Sol. And we have Alison from Oxfam, so another interesting sector.
Hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I am Chief Transformation Officer for Oxfam, which means I'm responsible for strategy, which doesn't appear in my title anywhere, but strategy, change, and technology, digital and data. So we're a global organisation. We work in about 47 countries, and we run global shared services for those countries and regions. And for those of you who don't know Oxfam, and there might be a few in the room that don't, we're a humanitarian response organisation. So we are currently deployed in Turkey to help with the earthquake, and in Ukraine, so we're in Moldova at the moment, where there is basically humanitarian need. Then we have a team that we deploy to, and in our sector we're known specifically for sanitation and health and water is our kind of specialism. And then we do programming and advocacy, so we're very noisy and we're very angry often, and that's what you also might know us for.
Fantastic, thanks Alison. And last but certainly not least, we have Neil from Arriva and, transport sector, so tell us more.
Yeah, hello, thank you, welcome everyone. Transport sector, it's nowhere near as admirable as Oxfam, but what we do is connect communities. We bring people together, whether it's for work, leisure, school, travel. My role focuses more on the train side of the business, but I'm also the chair of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Council for Arriva. It's a real area of passion for me, a topic that I'm very much interested in. Arriva, for those that don't know, Arriva is a European transport organisation across 10 European countries, 35,000 employees, lots and lots of buses and trains and other modes of transport.
Fantastic, thanks Neil. So let me just step back a little bit. I mean, everybody I know has at some point talked about diversity and inclusion. I don't know if anyone's not heard about it, then I don't know where you've been. But it is really interesting, and today's world, I guess, is competitive in a different sense, in that since lockdown, since all of those different phases across the world have been happening, and then everybody's come out of lockdown, there's also been a realisation that we don't have to work the way that we used to do. In fact, a lot of those, we were talking earlier, a lot of the assumptions about how we work have changed as well, and yet we're all attempting to be more inclusive, and you hear everybody talking about it. But what I'm really interested in today is actually the real life conversation. So, we were saying, fantastic if you can get your building to light up in a different colour, and that means diversity, inclusion, and it's symbolic. That is certainly symbolic. But for people on the ground, whatever their origin, whatever their background, making that a feel for them in an organisation, or a reason to join an organisation, and most importantly in today's world, actually a reason to stay. in this really connected world as well. This is really where it gets interesting, and it's more than a nice to have now. I mean, if you go into the boardrooms now, it's a financial benefit to be diverse and inclusive. You can prove it to the bottom line, but the point is even more so because that diversity side of things, particularly if you're digitising for the customer, so having that reflective diversity, whether it's diversity in the peoples that are in the organisation, or actually some of it is also diversity of thought, but how diverse your internal workforce is often a reflection of how diverse your customer products and your services as well, because naturally, we all have an unconscious bias, and therefore we bring that in at any stage. I will have an unconscious bias now, you will have one. We'll all get to different levels of awareness around that, but that perpetuates in the nicest sense in the brand that an organisation puts forward, and brands are worth quite a lot of value. So lots to think about there, but also in the day-to-day experiences that we're all having. So I'm going to dive in with the panel and ask you really, tell me about your real life stories in your organisation. What's it really like if we take away the headlines, and maybe Sol, if I could start with yourself, and we'll dot through if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, Dax has mentioned some great points there already. For me, diversity and inclusion is been amplified obviously the last few years. We had a coalition of different situations that everybody was in stasis during COVID and was able to really pause for a moment and really reflect and go, okay, well, how do we kind of galvanise and move on from here, take all that energy, whether it be George Floyd and BLM, whether it be the Me Too movement, whether it be Extinction Rebellion, the energy crisis at large, whatever it might be, people are much more mobilised to try and do something about a cause than they were, I think, 3 or 4 years prior. Dax mentioned about brands. It absolutely impacts your brand in terms of who you can hire, how you can hire, your market share, the perception of you in the marketplace. But specifically to HSBC, I've been there 6 months, and they're on a journey like lots of large enterprises are. Lots of us are obviously personally as well. Some practical things on that journey. So like many organisations, they've set up ERGs. So we call them ERGs, but essentially affinity groups where you've got groups that have been largely self-organising, which are a response to try and mobilise around a particular aspect, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be gender, whether it be the LGBT plus movement, etc. And they have now started to have more of a voice in terms of providing some insight, thought leadership, or proactive suggestivity for how to take things forward. For example, very recently, certain leaders in the black technology community, which I'm now part of at HSBC, they created with a digital agency an interactive, immersive video, which is basically used as e-learning now for line managers, and it's basically called In Your Shoes. If you maybe follow me on LinkedIn, you might be able to see a link to it, because I think we're going to try and make it publicly available. But essentially, what it does is you can take this as a course and imagine being in the shoes of somebody and their life story, their background, etc. So that's a kind of very practical thing. Another thing from a tooling perspective is that some colleagues in Poland were collaborating with other colleagues, again in the black tech community at HSBC, to try and come up with a way of enabling people to pronounce their names more effectively. And this has kind of grown like gangbusters, like across the business. So there's some similar tooling, I think, available on LinkedIn or on Wikipedia. But so something like that is now being used, and I think it's 10,000 people and counting out of our 250,000 staff who actually have access to this and have opted into this. So it's a bit of a variation on the he, she, or they, them, etc. Aspect. But at a top line level, just last point very quickly is that there is commitment, there is sponsorship at that senior level. So Noel Quinn is the group CEO. He's doubled down on gender and ethnicity specifically, but really the why of why we're doing this is to make sure that, as Dax was mentioning earlier, people can feel relevant, that they belong in an organisation. So if you're looking around the thought leadership linked to diversity and inclusion now, what you're seeing is it's often been extended out now to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the belonging is really, really important. 3 or 4 years ago, I went into jobs specifically, knowing that I was going to be often the only person who looked like me in a room, that can be mentally taxing. It can really be mentally taxing at different periods of time. But in terms of the belonging side of things, people having an organisation that is much more representative at a senior level, where younger people, early careers, can see other people that look like them, where suppliers of different backgrounds can be involved and engaged and encouraged to contribute to that value system as well. That's very, very powerful. So that senior commitment is there, but they're still on a journey, like many large enterprises are, to actually try and fulfil the promise so that people can generally belong in the organisation. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Sol. Alison, I'm curious to learn about not-for-profit and how it really works there.
Yeah, so I think it's worth saying that organisations generally are not doing this very well, and that will be the same for your organisation as it is for ours. Because as Sol said, it's a journey. So if I look back, like 3 years ago, we weren't talking about anti-racism in our organisation, which is strange given that we're a global organisation and a large proportion of our community live in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia and what have you. But it wasn't as fundamental to the conversation. And so, what happened for us is we have a community in Oxfam that's a group of young, very, as I said, very noisy activists who said it's not good enough. And I think it's also because the approach that we've taken up until that point is possibly you recognise in your own organisations as well. We'd kind of outsourced the problem. We'd outsourced it to HR, so we said it's a HR issue and we just need policy and what have you, and that will kind of do it for us. Or we'd outsourced it, it's just a leadership kind of diversity issue. And I'm not saying that that's not important, because representation is important, but we kind of said that's all we need to do. And so as long as our score on diversity of leadership is going up, then we're kind of ticking the box for diversity and inclusion. Or thirdly, we'd outsourced it to our staff networks. So we'd said, well, the BAME community, our black and brown colleagues, they have to do the work. So we came so a couple of years ago, we rewrote our strategy, and because of the lobbying that we got from our younger activist community, we made anti-racism, feminism a central part of our strategy. So we have to now not just be financially sustainable and responsible, but also we have to be safe. We doubled down on gender and race as well, safe, feminist and anti-racist. And so what that's meant over the last 2 years is that it now features in the way that we plan, the way that we allocate resource, the way that we partner with organisations. And I'm not trying to present that as a kind of perfect picture, because it's not a destination. It's a kind of ongoing. We remain kind of ongoing vigilant to those issues, but it started to impact the way that the organisation does all of its work, including how it deals with staff benefits and compensation and what have you. And the reason that we think that important, like you said, Dax, that the commercial business case for organisations has been made, like it's been made by Forbes and McKinsey, and it's not been made necessarily by Oxfam and the not-for-profit sector. It has been made. I think what we haven't done successfully in organisations is make it clear why it's important for individuals and their teams. And the reason that is because we believe, and the evidence is there, that cultural literacy will be one of the defining factors of people's career development in the next 10 years. So for seniors, like if you've got 10 years left in your career, you are going to have to get to grips with this. So it's going to determine how you progress in the organisation, the kinds of opportunities that there are for you. And so our approach has been, and question is, how do we develop that cultural literacy in our leaders, but also in our teams, so that those coming into the workplace also we're doing the right job, responsible job of making sure that they understand this work and the importance it is for them individually. So we have there's a 21-day learning journey that's mandatory for all staff on race and gender, for example, and we've approached it as a kind of one of the strategies is around the education and improvement of our cultural literacy across the organisation. And I think that that's probably, and it's led to some really uncomfortable conversations, you know, and lots of increased lobbying from parts of those communities. But if you do any of the work and yourselves on that, you know, the education and you know, some of the historical aspects of racism in our culture, then you start to understand why everyone's so angry about it. So that's been our approach in Oxfam. And like I said, it's a journey, really, not a destination for organisations.
Thanks, Alison. I appreciate you. I mean, you've been really candid there in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. And, you know, I hear all the positivity about diversity inclusion, but it's also good to hear actually there's much more to do. And, you know, if I think about the practical situations, I mean, belonging, and when you've got a team, that's something you can action. But what happens, you know, if you're in recruitment, you've gone out to an external firm, they've approached various different sources. Actually, the pipeline's not diverse. You're going to recruit anyway, you're not going to recruit. I mean, these are real life decisions. Are you going to hold back the commercial case? And these are ethical decisions as we go through. So I'm not saying it will be solved overnight. There's a lot of two-way in that in terms of getting folks into that pipeline to be comfortable enough to apply. And then, you know, once the door's open, then that dialogue can start. So it's interesting, the practicalities of some of these conversations. And I guess, you know, from the transport sector, really keen to hear what's happening there, 'cause lots of folks there, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to pivot completely on what I was going to say, because actually just listening in now, I was going to say, you know, Arriva, we're so far behind the curve. You know, on that maturity scale of diversity and inclusion, we're nowhere. But actually, I think our challenges are very similar. We, as a transport company, serve a really diverse group of people. We, you know, from school children up to the elderly, every sort of socio and economic and demographic mix you can think of. Do our leadership teams especially, represent the people that we're serving and the communities that we serve? Probably not. So how do you build the experiences, and how do you build the accessibility that we're meant to do as a public transport organisation when we don't actually understand our core customer base and the diversity of our customer base? That's a real challenge for us. I think we were joking earlier at Arriva, it's only about 5 years ago that we had offices that didn't have ladies' toilets, because we are such a heavily male-oriented organisation, engineering, drivers, operations. But I'm actually quite pleased listening in now as to how far we've come on that journey. Back in February 2022, we launched our global inclusion strategy. As part of that global inclusion strategy, every single business within the Arriva group was set targets. I can't share what those targets were, but we have internal targets as to various elements of diversity and inclusion. We then set up our global Arriva inclusion network, very similar, where we've got groups set up for well-being, disability, race, ethnicity, gender, etc., etc. But the pleasing thing is that each of those groups is sponsored by a board member of the management board now, and not just sponsored, but actually they reverse mentor. So people from those groups actually have started reverse mentoring some of our senior leaders and our management level, say, what is it like to be in my shoes? With 35,000 employees, 10 different countries, we've got such a huge range of locations, cultures, experiences. And what we're really looking at Arriva is how we sort of tap into that to help us build our product, help us build our teams, help us build our customer experience to be as representative as possible across the wider society. That's the big thing for us. I know we talk about talent pipelines, we talk about increasing brand reputation, enhancing brand reputation. For us, it's how do we deliver the best possible product to our customers who actually are as incredibly diverse and mixed as the whole world is, I guess, from our perspective.
Really, really interesting insights, and all, you know, lots of different themes in there. I'm interested also in the subtleties of inclusion and an inclusive environment, and the other side of it, which is including yourself. So encouraging everybody to include themselves, because if in society we don't see those divides. It's much easier to step in, and it's also much easier to create the environment. So some of this is around a societal mindset, around encouraging people in organisations. But I'm going to move next to the customer view. And Neil, actually, you've triggered some thoughts there around sort of diverse perspectives, and I'm really interested in, you know, how these diverse perspectives and experiences build into a lot of the digitisations you're all working on. So could you maybe give some practical examples of that in your organisation?
Yeah, sure. Actually, one that came up just earlier this month was we were designing. So we're talking to Alison. We're building a new station very close to her home, and we were putting ticket machines in to these stations, and they're really fancy new ticket machines. We're working with our core tech suppliers to design these, and we had a prototype in there, and somebody walked up from the team and said, "But I can't reach that button." And you know, if you're a child trying to purchase a ticket, or someone in a wheelchair, or whatever it may be, straight away we've discounted that whole group of people from being able to use this piece of kit in the station. We talk about learned experiences, lived experiences in our teams. You know, the more diverse views, insights, perspectives, thoughts we go and we can garner and gather, it helps us get over those sort of hurdles of, let's not design a product that doesn't work for everybody. Let's design products, whether they're digital or physical. You know, our trains and our buses, are they accessible enough? Can people easily get on? Can they easily get off? You know, do we have the right signage? What if you're blind? What if you're deaf? You know, how do we make sure that you know that the bus stop is arriving and you need to get off? So that, for me, is where this range of diversity and inclusion within our own teams can help us drive a product which means it's accessible to all.
Fantastic. Interesting views. And Alison, so what's that like at Oxfam? Lots of different perspectives there, I know, but how does it translate then into what you give out into the marketplace?
So it's worth saying we have like or probably a few more than two customer bases. We have supporters and people that buy things in our shops. And then for us in the UK, our customer overseas are our countries and regions, because what we want to do is make sure that the funding that they get hits the ground to deliver the most impact and as quickly as possible. So on in both of those groups where we're designing, and I'll give an example, we're just about to put some new technology into our shop network. So our retail network, we've got about 600 shops on the high street, but they've been running old technology for a very long time. So in building that product, so we know the rhetoric about user-centered design and why that's really important. For us, we ask three fundamental questions. So we have a user representative group when we're building, like Neil said, when we're building product. But there are three questions that they have to answer collectively with the developers, with the technology teams, which is, whose rights are we centering in this? Who can't, if we design it in this way, who can't get access to that product? And also who's taking the decisions ultimately, because there is a trade-off between the commercial, and we're, you know, in that part of our organisation, we're a commercial business, and our job is to generate as much income as we can for Oxfam and for the work that we do. So there is sometimes a trade-off between the commercials of a project and then the rights or the accessibility of that particular product. So I think in the way that we've designed those projects and ultimately, broadly, we've got a kind of retail transformation program, is to try and centre the rights of those communities of diverse perspectives right in the heart of the centre of that design, and it's led to some incredible conversations that we've rethought about how we put in electronic point of sale into the retail network as a result of the input from people that have diverse characteristics, and ultimately we feel that gives a better product on the outcome of that, but also that actually we're going to be more commercially viable, because we're talking to sections of the community that come into our shops that we probably haven't talked to before. So that's a piece of work that we're doing at the moment. And then for countries and regions, it's slightly different, because in some of the contexts that we're working, actually the technology itself is, so the Wi-Fi is unstable. South Africa's on rolling 4-hourly electricity generation at the moment, so it's a challenging environment to work for. So what we rely on there really is the regional technology teams to support us, and we in the way that we allocate the resource, we look at all of the inputs that we've got from service desk, ticketing, and the feedback that we get from countries, to try and make the better decisions about where we invest our resources for those environments. But we're working in the DRC and Yemen, and that's a very different context than Chiswick High Street retail store. So it's it can be a challenging set of trade-offs to manage, really, not for me, just for me, but also or for the senior leadership, but also for the teams that ultimately want to do their best for the communities that we're responsible for.
Thanks, Alison. And I mean, you bring into there, which is relevant to HSBC as well, the international nature of the organisation, and actually the regional view as well. And so I know you look after digitisation at HSBC. How is that all translating then into the marketplace now?
Like I said earlier, it's still a bit of a journey. It's still very malleable, and still very nuanced, based on, obviously, as you know, the different cultural norms, I think, in different territories, and the different perspectives that they're also going on, or doubling down on, as we all, as a global federation, try and kind of step forward together. From in the 6 months I've been here, I've been pleasantly surprised by the very practical side of activities that the various employee resource groups are engaged in. So earlier I think somebody was talking about reverse mentoring. We've kind of got aspects like that, but then obviously I talked earlier about some of the practical solutions that have been put together, technical ones like the immersive e-learning. But there are other things that have been galvanised for. So last year there was some diversity very much focused on social mobility in the UK, which has led to changes to our supplier strategy. And we're going to be setting up, hopefully by half year, who knows, but certainly this year, a supplier portal which is diverse in every aspect. So this is enabling a smaller digital agency who a small tranche of work of maybe $250,000 would be gold to them, if they're based up north, Bradford, Grimsby, etc., for them to be on our portal and engaged in soliciting work from HSBC, rather than, for example, the work going to the usual suspects of larger enterprises. And again, to give you a scale of the things, because I appreciate $250,000 is a lot of money, HSBC's average kind of initiative tranche of work is like $1.5 million, and that routinely, those tranches and smaller ones go to the bigger entities. So looking to spread the cake around there from a socioeconomic perspective, because we recognise that having smaller suppliers, that can do a lot in terms of wealth generation in various territories. And then obviously you've got other lenses that talk to that supplier diversity as well. From a recruitment perspective, I think that the diversity that the ERGs can bring to thinking around solutions to solve for pipeline, to solve for mobility of in-flight hires, so existing hires, is very creative and very powerful. We have reverse mentoring is also mentioned before, because in our organisation, and I know in my previous organisation, we had specifically a lot of women, and we had a lot of people of colour who were in the organisation, but they left. So attrition after a certain period of time, people were like, well, I don't see any progress for me here, I'm off. Rather than, you know, they didn't have a problem getting in grads, early career staff. So how do you kind of, you know, solve for that? Reverse mentoring is one thing to maybe give some nuances around there, but also, you know, just having events, activities where people can actually start to engage and understand that this is the path I might need to take here. You know, in my own career specifically, I've mentored other people who are, you know, more junior to me in other aspects. I mentor externally in the startup sector, specifically to fintechs where the founders are of colour, and helping them navigate the journey that they have embarked on, and maybe some of the subtleties that they might not have fully appreciated, you know, having gone into that journey. So sharing knowledge there. But then it's only been more recently myself that I've said, you know what, you know, I'm a director at HSBC, you know, I'm semi-senior, I'm doing okay, but, you know, I'm actually going to seek out mentorship and sponsorship, because in my own career today, that hasn't actually often been the case. I think we were talking about this yesterday, where there's something around people I know who are friends of mine who don't look like me, who have at various times been tapped on the shoulder, and it hasn't happened necessarily in a work setting either. It's maybe happened at a lunch, over golf, in a social setting, in which potentially, even though I might have been in some of those settings, the person who's decided to sponsor that other person hasn't, for whatever reason, felt affinity to sponsor somebody that doesn't look like them and looks like me. So I'm aware that how powerful it is to have that mentorship and sponsorship, and it's something that, you know, I've encouraged others, you know, peers who are of colour, you know, women I know, other people with diverse characteristics to try and seek that out now in the last couple of years. And you're not just seeking out one individual either. You're trying to seek out, I guess, dare I say, a board of people that can actually make you whole and help encourage you and uplift you and energize you and challenge you actually on your own kind of developmental journey as well. So that's another aspect there. And one other thing I'll just say while I quickly remember, diversity is going to be incredibly important in terms of the technological changes that we are all aware of in this room. So, you know, we're now at what I see the third age of compute, which is, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, intelligent agency via machine learning, quantum computing, you know, and cloud computing. Obviously, it's been around for a while, but you know, the ability that you've got all of those things coming together. We're now into this third age, and if you think about ChatGPT around Christmas time, you were basically going in there and asking questions. You know, write me a report for X or whatever it might have been, but that was giving you, in and of the round, learned materials from the web, which in and of themselves had their nuances and biases. So, you know, a very basic example, but Google, if you went on Google a few years ago and said frazzled, pictures of women only came up. Are men never frazzled? So, you know, there's a whole thing now I've got about ethics in artificial intelligence and ethics in technology generally. Simply put, the solutions that we need to be creating need to make sure that before we get to the technology and the product market fit and the externalization of it, that it's been road tested with a broad group of people beforehand to make sure that we're not implicitly going negatively down a road and doing further damage, rather than, you know, you can obviously stop a lot of those things and limit them and say, well, actually, we wouldn't have advised you do that before it even goes further than that. And so ethics as a service, there's somebody who contacted me, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. They're running ethics as a service. They're working with a lot of large organizations. So that's one for all the technologists like us here, that's an emerging area which a lot of organisations aren't thinking about. Everyone's getting excited about AI, machine learning, etc. But we need to be really mindful about that side of things to make sure that we're putting the right things out there to customers, colleagues, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and a really in-depth answer. We've got a very chatty panel today, so I'm going to have to ask you all to give me a quick answer to the next question. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to put you on the spot, but in a good way. Future-proofing. So we've talked about lots of different things, and in some way this is all about pathfinding rather than maybe equality and diversity, and actually setting everybody on the right path. For me, when I was doing my A-levels, I happened to be doing sciences. I was the only woman in the room at the time. I didn't even notice. It was only later that everyone said, there's a load of blokes around you. I said, well, I was actually interested in science, and so were they. And so we were just getting into the subject. Apparently, this is now equality and diversity. So it is all about mindset. But for me, that taught me later on in life that actually everybody didn't have the mindset that I had. And so it's really important to spread the word. And so my question is, in that sort of future-proofing, spreading the word, what's the one point you would leave the audience with?
Sorry, I've got two.
All right, as it's you.
I think talking about future-proofing our organisations, there's a couple of things which I'm really passionate about. One we've spoken about already, which is our talent pipelines, our recruitment pipelines, is how do you expand the top of that funnel to allow as many and as diverse an entry point into that funnel. Now I'm not afraid to say it at Arriva, we're going to try that every job we are recruiting for, the last two candidates within there, one of them must be from an underrepresented group. Now, that's quite aggressive, and I don't know whether we'll get there or not. That's certainly our intention. Is not saying you have to recruit them, but what I'm saying is in that last stage, someone must be from one of our underrepresented groups. So for us, future-proofing is about starting to diversify the workforce and bringing those recruitment pipelines in. Second point, and more importantly, I think, is creating that environment and culture of psychological safety. I know we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, but for me, that can only happen if we've got an environment and a culture and a workplace where everybody feels safe, speaking up, talking, putting their ideas forward. And that this is where we talk about it filtering right the way through the organisation. Because actually, like you say, the management board can make lots of noises and put LinkedIn posts about equality, inclusion. How does, the bus driver on the ground, for example, or the engineer on the ground feel? Is their line manager, who's, Johnny engineer, who's very boisterous in a lad's environment, is he making that space safe to open it up for a more diverse workforce?
Fantastic points. Definitely worth 2 points.
So for us, it's two things. It's seeing D&I as a process and a service, not a thing that happens in HR or elsewhere, or in affinity groups. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, you owe it to yourselves and your teams, because if you take my hypothesis that this is a skill that you will need through your career, the cultural literacy will become one of the defining things that helps you use AI in an ethical way, or helps you design digital product in a different way, then you have to make it a central part of the way that your part of the organisation, or the organisation as a whole, if you're at that level, operates. The last thing I'd say is that like I said, it's kind of inherent in our strategy, but also it's inherent in our theory of change for transformation as well. So it's really simple. If we want people to change the way that they work, if we want them to change the way that they think about the future of the organisation, then they have to feel like they're listened, that their perspective is valid and heard. And so we keep that a bit as our mantra as well. And so, cultural literacy, keep it central, and see it as a kind of process and a service that you as a leader is providing to the organisation, not as a thing that kind of happens elsewhere.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison.
It was twos, and I think I'll have a two. So very quickly, agree with everything that's been said. Two things for me. Data first. I have gone through my career where at different times I haven't felt like putting in my demographic data. I've gone the other way now the last 4 or 5 years. I've been like, yep, I'm just going to put those things in, and that's part of me just saying it's me. But a lot of organisations still struggle because they know that a lot of people think that if they put in that demographic detail that says I'm black, I'm Christian, I'm heterosexual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's going to be used against me. I think that you need to be in the game, so put the data in, and that starts to inform actionable insights and activity for organisations. The second is, I guess, linked to that psychological safety that has already been mentioned. The organisations of the future that have a workforce that is on point for them across a range of indices, those organisations are the ones that give people, the comfort to be authentically themselves. So those 2 points there, data and the authenticity as well. So thank you.
Thank you all very, very much. Some really interesting, incited thoughts, and definitely some thoughts I haven't heard before, which is what it's all about. I am very conscious that it's pretty much at time, but if you would like to chat to any of our panellists, they will be around following. So please do have those conversations, and I hope you have a lovely rest of day. Thank you so much.